Greetings, everyone, and welcome to LOGOS Poetry Collective for this very special gathering featuring John Murillo and Nicole Sealey. My name is Travis Helms. I'm the founder and curator of LOGOS Poetry Collective, and I'm joined with a co-MC, Jason Myers, who is director and editor-in-chief and basically the beating heart and visionary mind behind EcoTheo Review. We're also co-presenting this event with Bookwoman, Austin's premier feminist bookshop, and we'll be giving you all sorts of details over the course of the evening on how you can get your hands on John and Nicole's books and support a wonderful independent bookstore. Before we get started, we'd like to just give you a bit of a sense of how LOGOS came into being, its genesis story, if you will. I'm an Episcopal priest serving the University of Texas campus, and in 2019, a good friend and I were having a conversation about how sometimes poetry readings could feel a little impersonal and transactional. We talked about how we could attend readings and feel like we were either passively absorbing poetry as audience members or we were just discharging it as readers from a podium. We started wondering about what it might look like if we were to integrate lovingly, artfully, and non-dogmatically elements of ritual and liturgy into the format of a traditional poetry reading. Out of that conversation and curiosity came LOGOS Poetry Collective, which we describe as a liturgically inflected poem sharing experience. We typically congregate at Lazarus Brewing Company in East Austin, but we've done our best to translate our unique liturgically inflected format from analog to virtual platforms so that we can digitally evoke transcendence through poetry, ritual, and conversation together. And now I'd like to just give you a quick sense of how in practice we do that. Following this word of welcome, we're going to read our opening text together. This is a text that will serve as a sort of invocation and an invocatory prayer and set the tone and tenor for our entire gathering. It's been selected by one of our poets. And you'll see presented on the screen before you that poem lineated in different ways. Part of the text will be bolded, part of it will not. And we invite you to speak the bolded portions of the text aloud into the spaces around you. We read these antiphonally and responsively, the way you might a psalm in a church service. Following the opening text, we're going to have a reading by our first poet, Nicole Sealey, and then Nicole's reading will be followed by John's. We'll then have a little bit of curated conversation with the poets and have a chance to close by just sharing a bit more about what these poets and LOGOS and EcoTheo are up to before we do another responsive reading of our closing poem by Philip Levine as a sort of benediction to bless and speed you off into your evening. So thank you so much again for taking the time to be here with us, for your presence, for the gift of the energy you bring into this space. I'm going to ring this prayer bell and let it resonate for just a moment. And then after that, we'll begin our program by reading our opening text together. Welcome, y'all. We're so glad you're here.
Why Some People Be Mad at Me Sometimes by Lucille Clifton. They ask me to remember,
but they want me to remember
their memories,
and I keep on
remembering
mine.
Thank you, John and Nicole, for leading us in that opening recitation. And now it is my great joy and privilege to introduce our first featured poet, Nicole Sealey. After plagues of red locusts are unleashed by a jealous God, hell-bent on making a scene, her way of saying hello or how dare you, townspeople build her a mansion of dirt, embedded with bone china, decorated wall to wall with statues made from clay farmed from anthills. So opens in Igbo land, one of the many unendingly stunning meditations on life, fate, luck, love, and justice that constitute Ordinary Beast, Nicole Sealey's breathtaking, life-giving debut collection. A volume whose effect, as Patricia Smith perfectly put it, punches the daylight from your chest. Nothing ordinary here, but beast. Yeah, that's it. This thing has teeth. The gods appear throughout these pages, whose lyrics, many based on forms, revisions of forms, and forms of Sealey's own invention, sear with the lucidity of a mirror made of light on ice, in which you see the world and your own self reflect, refract, and flare in a fierce and shattering brightness, and are asked to stare right back. Born in St. Thomas, USVI, and raised in Apopka, Florida, Nicole Sealey is the author of Ordinary Beast, finalist for the PEN Open Book and Hurston Wright Legacy Awards, and The Animal After Whom Other Animals Are Named, winner of the Drinking Gourd Chapbook Prize. Her honors include a Rome Prize from the American Academy in Rome, a Hodder Fellowship from Princeton University, the Stanley Kunitz Memorial Prize from the American Poetry Review, a Poetry International Prize, and countless grants and fellowships, including ones from Canto Mundo, Cave Canem, and MacDowell. Sealey's work has appeared in Best American Poetry 2018, The New Yorker, The New York Times, and elsewhere. Formerly the executive director at Cave Canem, she is a visiting professor at Boston University, City College of New York, and Syracuse University, and also teaches in NYU's low residency MFA Writers Workshop in Paris. Nicole Sealey is also the creator of the Sealey Challenge, a call to action in which readers are invited to read 31 books of poetry in the 31 days of August, which I've tried and, I confess, failed at, unlike my co-MC Jason Myers. Though I shall endeavor, in the words of Samuel Beckett, to fail again, fail better. Reading Nicole Sealey's poems, I do indeed feel summoned to fail better, see better, be better. The gods who own these poems ask us to reckon with failure, with the failures of society, of humanity, of love, in order to prophesy the realities that may be possible if we can make something more real, more true. In a note, Sealey describes that in Igbo land refers to the construction of Mbari in Nigeria, a building erected in response to a major catastrophe and dedicated to a deity. Sealey's poems ask us to reckon with and confess the catastrophe of gods that we have worshipped, to dismantle old altars so that new ones can be founded. That poem concludes, "The West in me wants the mansion to last. The African knows it cannot. Everything aspires to one degradation or another. I want to learn how to make something holy, then walk away." Sealey's poems do show me, for one, what it looks like to make things holy or at least whole, and how blessed we are to be present to the art of such soul-sanctifying making as we welcome to Logos, Nicole Sealey.
Oh my goodness, Travis, thank you so much for that very generous introduction. I appreciate you so much. Thank you, Jason, for having me as well. Thank you, Logos. Thank you, Eco Theo. Thank you, Bookwoman. Thank you, all of you, for being with us here tonight. And of course, my co-reader, dear John, down in the basement. Thank you all. So just a few poems then. The first of which is called "The First Person Who Will Live to Be 150 Years Old Has Already Been Born." And it's for my mom. Scientists say the average human life gets 3 months longer every year. By this math, death will be optional, like a tie or dessert or suffering. My mother asks whether I'd want to live forever. I'd get bored, I tell her. But she says there's so much to do, meaning she believes there's much she hasn't done. 30 years ago, she was the age I am now, but unlike me, too industrious to think about birds disappeared by rain. If only we had more time or enough money to be kept on ice until such a time, science could bring us back. Of late, my mother has begun to think life short-lived. I'm too young to convince her otherwise. The one and only occasion I was in the same room as the Mona Lisa, it was encased in glass behind what I imagine were velvet ropes. There's far less between ourselves and oblivion, skin that often defeats its very purpose. Or maybe its purpose isn't protection at all, but rather to provide a place similar to a doctor's waiting room in which to sit until our names are called. Hold your questions until the end. Mother, measure my wide open arms. We still have this much time to kill. Medical history. I've been pregnant. I've had sex with a man who's had sex with men. I can't sleep. My mother's mother had asthma. My father had a stroke. My father's mother has high blood pressure. Both grandfathers died from diabetes. I drink. I don't smoke. Xanax for flying, propranolol for anxiety. My eyes are bad. I'm spooked by wind. Cousin Lily died from an aneurysm. Aunt Ilda, a heart attack. Uncle Ken, wise as he was hit by a car, as if to disprove whatever theory toward which I write. And I understand the stars in the sky are already dead. So, okay. This is the point in the program at which I would ask how you're doing, but I can't hear you, but I'm hopeful that you're doing well. Hysterical strength. When I hear news of a hitchhiker struck by lightning yet living, or a child lifting a 2-ton sedan to free his father pinned underneath, or a camper fighting off a grizzly with her bare hands until someone, a hunter perhaps, can shoot it dead. My thoughts turn to Black people, the hysterical strength we must possess to survive our very existence, which I fear many believe is and treat as itself a freak occurrence. So this next poem was inspired by a work of art called Candelabra with Heads by a German artist by the name of Thomas Hirschhorn. So this poem was inspired by that work of art, and the form of this poem is the third and fourth stanza is the reverse of the first and second, and then it ends with a thesis question, so to speak. What else do you need to know about this poem? I think that's it. Candelabra with Heads. Actually, you do need to know that the work of art, what it looks like is a group of mannequins duct taped and lifted up on a wooden structure. Okay, so that's that. Candelabra with Heads. Had I not brought with me my mind as it has been made, this thing, this brood of mannequins, cocooned and mounted on a wooden scaffold, might be 8 infants swaddled and sleeping, might be 8 fleshy fingers on one hand, might be a family tree with 8 pictured frames. Such trees occur in the brain. Can you see them hanging? Their shadow is a crowd stripping the tree of souvenirs. Skin shrinks and splits. The bodies weep fat, the color of yolk. Can you smell them burning, their perfume climbing as wisteria would a trellis? As wisteria would a trellis burning, their perfume climbing, fat the color of yolk, can you smell them? Skin shrinks and splits, the bodies weep. Is a crowd stripping the tree of souvenirs? Can you see them hanging? Their shadow frames. Such treaties occur in the brain. Might be a family tree with 8 pictured. Might be 8 fleshy fingers on one hand. Might be 8 infants swaddled and sleeping and mounted on a wooden scaffold, this brood of mannequins cocooned as it has been made, this thing. Had I not brought with me my mind, who can see this and not see lynchings? Okay. So this next poem, entitled In Defense of Candelabra with Heads, is inspired by the one I just read. So in my chapbook, The Animal After Whom Other Animals Are Named, at the advice of editors who I admire, I extracted that last line, who can see this and not see lynchings? But for my full length, I decided that it was necessary for the poem and I included it. So this poem is in defense of that instinct to include that last line in the poem I just read. So again, this is called In Defense of Candelabra with Heads. If you've read the candelabra with heads that appears in this collection and the one in the animal, thank you. The original, the one included here, is an example, untold, of a poem that can speak for itself, but loses faith in its ability to do so by ending with a thesis question. Yeats said a poem should click shut like a well-made box. I don't disagree. I ask who can see this and not see lynchings, not because I don't trust you, dear reader, or my own abilities. I ask because the imagination would have us believe, much like faith, faith the original candelabra lacks in things unseen. You should know that human limbs burn like branches and branches like human limbs. Only after man began hanging man from trees, then setting him on fire, which would jump from limb to branch like a bastard species of bird, did we come to know such things. 100 years from now, October 9, 2116, 8:18 p.m., when all but the lucky are good and dead, may someone happen upon the question in question. May that lucky someone be Black and so far removed from the verb lynch that she be dumbfounded by its meaning. May she then call up Hirshhorn's candelabra with heads. May her imagination, not her memory, run wild. I think I have just 3 more poems. Even the gods. Even the gods misuse the unfolding blue. Even the gods misread the wind flowers nod towards sunlight as consent to consume. Still, you envy the horse that draws their chariot, bone of their bone. The wilting mash of air alone keeps you from scaling Olympus with gifts of dead or dying things dangling from your mouth. Your breath like the sea inching away. It is rumored gods grow where the blood of a hanged man drips. You insist on being this man. The gods abuse your grace. Still, you'd rather live among the clear, cloudless white, enjoying what is left of their ambrosia. Who should be happy this time? Who brings cake to whom? Pray the gods do not misquote your covetous pulse for chaos, the black from which they were conceived. Even the eyes of gods must adjust to light. Even gods have gods. Imagine Sisyphus happy. Give me tonight to be inconsolable, so the death drive does not declare itself, so the moonlight does not convince sunrise. I was born before sunrise, when morning masquerades as night, the temperature of blood quivering like a mouth in mourning. How do we author our gentle birth, the height we were? Were we gods rolling stars across a sundog sky, the same as scarabs? We fit somewhere between God and mineral, angel and animal, believing a thing as sacred as the sun rises and falls like an ordinary beast. Deer sniff lifeless fawns before leaving. Elephants encircle the skulls and tusks of their dead, none wanting to leave the bones behind, none knowing their leave will lessen the loss. But birds pluck their own feathers. Dogs lick themselves to wound. Allow me this luxury. Give me tonight to cut and salt the open. Give me a shovel to uproot the mandrake and listen for its scream. Give me a face that toils so closely with stone, it is itself stone. I promise to enter the flesh again. I promise to circle, to ascend. I promise to be happy tomorrow. And my final poem, Object Permanence. Object Permanence for John. We wake as if surprised the other is still there, each petting the sheet to be sure. How have we managed our way to this bed, beholden to heat like dawn, indebted to light? Though we're not so self-important as to think everything has led to this, everything has led to this. There's a name for the animal love makes of us. Named, I think, like rain for the sound it makes. You are the animal after whom other animals are named. Until there's none left to laugh, days will start with the same startle and end with caterpillars gorged on milkweed. Oh, how we entertain the angels with our brief animation. Oh, how I'll miss you when we're dead. Thank you so much.
Nicole, thank you. That is one of my favorite poems, and now I have the honor of getting to introduce its inspiration and one of my favorite poets. And who among us does not need saving? Martin Espada asks at the end of his foreword to John Murillo's Up Jump the Boogie. There is indeed something redemptive in Murillo's work. As I read and reread the poems in his 2010 debut and the long anticipated follow-up from last year, Contemporary American Poetry, I noted the number of times the word risen appeared, and the desire to lift and be lifted recurs throughout his formally complex, dynamic, and magnificent work. Consider poem ending and beginning on lines by Larry Levis, in which the speaker not only hoists into the air 335 goddamn pounds, but summons as well a saint of iron and his original weightlifting guru, Robert Caldwell. The effort to save from history, from forgetting, from America, and the brutalities of human relationships in the market totalitarianism of the Anthropocene is inextricable from the work of love. And in poems that take us from the grave of Etheridge Knight and a father's deathbed to lovers' beds and the sexual streets of Amherst, Massachusetts on a winter's night, Murillo reminds us that all songs are love songs. But these are not sentimental poems. They attend thoroughly, often painfully, to the realities of life and the lives of Black people in a country and culture that has inflicted as well as glamorized their pain. In his stunning crown of sonnets, A Refusal to Mourn the Deaths by Gunfire of Three Men in Brooklyn, Murillo captures the agonizing regularity of the state execution and erasure of Black life with the refrain, "It's him again," the anonymity of him as haunting as the death that saturates the poem. He questions the capacity of poetry or prayer or pistols to make right all that has been done wrong. Throughout his poems, we move from violence to tenderness, distance to nearness, forgetting to remembering, disappearing gods and summons to say amen and praise it all, from the hymn's hard mysteries to locked guns, loss, and lamentations of swans. That word, we learn, is not just the sound of grief, but the gathering of birds. And if there is sorrow and anguish throughout Murillo's poems, there is always, too, the music that comes from congregations, of the faithful, of poets, of memories. Music that comes from the desire to save, to savor this life with its range of experiences and emotions. In On Epiphany, it is dust as well as song lifted from an old piano. As Murillo says, in trying to conjure one song, I am reminded of another. This calls to mind Lucille Clifton's question, why is there under that poem always an other poem? For the poems and the poems under the poems, Murillo has been awarded a Pushcart Prize, 2 Larry Neal Writers Awards, the J. Howard and Barbara M.J. Wood Prize from the Poetry Foundation, and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, and a host of others. Contemporary American Poetry was recently nominated for an NAACP Image Award. In its penultimate poem, On Prosody, Murillo tells us of the child of a composer, born deaf, who plays his father's favorite album, Dusk to Dawn, on the day of his death, biting the speaker. So music traveled from his teeth along his jaw into a skull so taken with the song that the boy himself became that song. These are poems of music incarnate, songs embodied and to embody. They are poems to eat, poems to drink, poems to smell and see and hear and feel. These poems will break you and they will save you. Friends, please welcome John Murillo.
Hey, hey. Thank you, everybody. That was a great introduction, Jason. Man, wow. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Nicole, of course. You know, I was hearing you read and I was thinking, I don't take you for granted as a partner, but I do think that I might take you for granted as a poet. You know, we don't walk around here poeting to each other, you know, just, you know, here. But then I'm hearing a poem, I'm like, God damn, like, she could write some poems, you know. Thank you, Logos. Thank you, Echo Theo. Thank you, Bookwoman, and everybody here. I'm seeing so many familiar faces on the screen, and it's really wonderful that you guys have chosen to spend some time with us tonight. So I have good news and bad news. The good news is that I'm only reading 3 poems. The bad news is I write really, really, really long poems. So I'm not going to go over time, though, that I promise you. So the first is the Iliad, next to Odyssey, and lastly, maybe the Inferno, we'll see. So I'll start with On Confessionalism, which is the first poem in the book. And I want to dedicate this to Jason Marigassetti and Janine Joseph. For no other reason that I miss them. We went to graduate school together, all of us. And this is my first time seeing Jason. We just figured out since about 2010 or 11. And I think Mariga I haven't seen since 2007 in person since we left. Hey. So this poem is for you guys. On Confessionalism. Not sleepwalking, but waking still with my hand on a gun and the gun in a mouth and the mouth on the face of a man on his knees. Autumn of '89, and I'm standing in a Section 8 apartment parking lot, pistol cocked, and staring down at this man, then up into the mug of an old woman staring, watering the single sad flower to the left of her stoop, the flower also staring. My engine idling behind me, a slow moaning bass line and the bark of a dead rapper nudging me on, all to say someone's brokenhearted. And this man with the gun in his mouth, this man who, like me, is really little more than a boy, may or may not have something to do with it, may or may not have said a thing or two, betrayed a secret, say, that walked my love away. And why not say it? She adored me, and I, her, more than anyone, anything in life up to then, and then still for 2 decades after, and therefore went for broke. Blacked out and woke, having gutted my piggy and pawned all my gold to buy what a homeboy said was a Beretta. Blacked out and woke, my hand on a gun, the gun in a mouth, a man who was really a boy on his knees. And because I loved the girl, I actually paused before I pulled the trigger. Once, twice, 3 times. Then panicked not just because the gun jammed, but because what if it hadn't? Because who did I almost become there that afternoon in a Section 8 apartment parking lot, pistol cocked with the sad flower staring? Because I knew the girl I loved, no matter how this all played out, would never have me back. Day of damaged ammo or grime that clogged the chamber. Day of faulty rods or springs come loose in my fist. Day nobody died. So why not hallelujah, say amen or thank you? My mother sang for years of God, babes, and fools. My father, lymph node masses fading from his x-rays, said surviving one thing means another comes and kills you. He's dead, and so I trust him. Dead, and so I'd wonder years about the work I left undone. Boy on his knees, a man now, risen and likely plotting his long way back to me. Fuck it. I tucked my tool like the movie gangsters do and jumped back in my bucket. Cold enough day to make a young man weep. Afternoon when everything or nothing changed forever. The dead rapper grunted, the bass line faded. My spirits whispered something from the trees. I left, then lost the pistol in a storm drain, somewhere between that life and this. Left the pistol in a storm drain, but never got around to wiping away the prints. This next poem, Nicole says, I do too much to introduce the poem, so I'm going to try not to, but I do think there are a couple things you need to know. I should just read the poem, and then if it fails, I can blame her later on after we get off the air to make the point that I need to introduce the poem, or I should give you guys some contextual information. I think I'm just going to read the poem. And if there are things that don't make sense to you, you can ask about it in the Q&A, and then I'll still blame her. No, but I will say this about the poem. Okay, so I am a jazz fan, and I came across an article years ago about the jazz musician Eric Dolphy. And in the article, I read that one of his practices was he would transcribe bird calls. Nicole's getting that. He would transcribe bird calls because there was something pure in his song, he said. I'm sorry, in their song, that he wanted to get into his own music, something earnest. And that's all I'll say about this. Upon reading that Eric Dolphy transcribed even the calls of certain species of birds, I think first of two sparrows I met when walking home late night years ago in another city not unlike this, the one bird frantic, attacking I thought the way she swooped down, circled my head and flailed her wings in my face. How she seemed to scream each time I swung, how she dashed back and forth between me and a blood red Corolla parked near the opposite curb. How, finally, I understood. I spied another bird, also calling, his foot inexplicably caught in the car's closed door, beating his whole bird body against it, trying, it appeared, to bang himself free. And who knows how long he'd been there, flailing. Who knows? He and the other I mistook at first for a bat. They called to me, something between squawk and chirp, something between song and prayer, to do something, anything. And like any good God, I disappeared. Not indifferent exactly, but with things to do, and most likely on my way home from another heartbreak. Call it 1997, and say I'm several thousand miles from home, by which I mean those were the days I made of everyone a love song, by which I mean I was lonely and unrequited. But that's not quite it either. Truth is, I did manage to find a few to love me, but couldn't always love them back. The Rasta law professor, the firefighter's wife, the burlesque dancer whose daughter blackened drawings with M's to mean the sky was full of birds the day her daddy died. I think his widow said he drowned one morning on a fishing trip. Anyway, I'm digressing. But if you asked that night, did I mention it was night? Why, I didn't even try to jimmy the lock to spring the sparrow. I couldn't say truthfully, that it had anything to do with envy, with wanting a woman to plead as deeply for me as these sparrows did, one for the other. No, I'd have said something instead about the neighborhood itself. The car thief shot a block and a half east the week before, or about the men I came across nights prior, sweat slicked and shirtless, grappling in the middle of the street, the larger one's chest pressed to the back of the smaller, bruised and bleeding both. I know you thought this was about birds, but stay with me. I left them both in the street, the same street where I'd leave the sparrows, the men embracing, and for all one knows, they could have been lovers. The one whispering an old, old tune into the ear of the other, baby, baby, don't leave me this way. I left the men where I'd leave the sparrows and their song. And as I walked away, I heard one of the men call to me, please, or help, or brother, or some such. And I didn't break stride, not one bit. It's how I've learned to save myself. Let me try this another way. Call it 1977, and say I'm back west, South Central Los Angeles, my mother and father at it again, but this time in the street, broad daylight, and all the neighbors watching. One, I think his name was Sonny, runs out from his duplex to pull my father off. You see where I'm going with this. My mother crying out, fragile as a sparrow. Sonny fighting my father, fragile as a sparrow, and me, years later, trying to get it all down. As much for you, I'm saying, as for me. Sonny catches a left, lies flat on his back, blood starting to pool, and his own wife wailing, my mother wailing, and traffic backed now half a block. Horns, whistles, and soon sirens. 1977 summer, and all the trees full of birds. Hundreds, I swear. And since I'm the one writing it, I'll tell you, they were crying. Which brings me back to Dolphy and his transcribing. The jazz man, I think, wanted only to get it down pure, to get it down exact. The animal racking itself against the car's steel door. The animals in the trees reporting. The animals we make of ourselves and one another, flailing, failing. Stay with me now. Days after the dust up, my parents took me to the park. And in this park was a pond. And in this pond were birds, not sparrows, but swans. And my father spread a blanket and brought from a basket some apples and a paring knife. Summertime. My mother wore sunglasses and long sleeves. My father, now sober, cursed himself for leaving the radio, but my mother forgave him and said, as she caressed the back of his hand, that we could just listen to the swans. And we listened, and I watched. Two birds coupling, one beating its wings as it mounted the other. Summer 1977, I listened and I watched. When my parents made love late into that night, I covered my ears in the next room, scanning the encyclopedia for swans. It meant nothing to me then, at least. But did you know the collective noun for swans is a lamentation? And is a lamentation not its own species of song? What a woman wails, punched drunk in the street, or what a widow might sing, learning her man was drowned by swans, a lamentation of them. Imagine the capsized boat, the panicked man struck about the eyes, nose, and mouth each time he comes up for air. Imagine the birds coasting away in the water suddenly calm, either trumpet swans or mutes. The dead man's wife running for help, crying to any who'd listen, a lamentation, and a city busy saving itself. I'm digressing, sure. But did you know that to digress means to stray from the flock? When I left my parents' house, I never looked back, by which I mean I made like a god and disappeared, as when I left the sparrows and the copulating swans, as when someday I'll leave this city, its every flailing, its every animal song. Told you it was long. So one more poem. This would be the last one, not as long as the other. So Travis, I don't know if you want to pull that up. I see one of my favorite students, Leah Silvius, out there. Hey, Leah. And Heidi Seaborn, a good friend. I see you as well. So I will say a little bit to introduce this poem. From Los Angeles originally, and a few years ago, I went out to attend my grandmother's funeral, and it was around a little bit before the 25th anniversary of the Los Angeles riots or rebellions after the Rodney King verdicts were announced. And it was an interesting time in that, as has been the case for the last few hundred years, I guess one could say, there had been some contentious relations, I'd say, between the police and Black people in America. And I had students at the time who were very heavily involved in protests around the shootings of unarmed Black people by police officers. And when I went back to Los Angeles, I visited an old neighborhood that had large parts of which had been burnt down during the riots of 1992. And I was thinking about that time. I was thinking about home. I was thinking about my students. It led to a longer poem, the sonnet sequence that Jason mentioned, but also a few short poems. Some did make the manuscript, some did not. This is a poem, I guess it can be about homecoming. And it takes its title from a Marvin Gaye song, Mercy, Mercy Me. And if you know the song, you know the next lines, things aren't what they used to be. Crips, Bloods, and butterflies, a sunflower somehow planted in the alley, its broken neck. Maybe memory is all the home you get, and rage where you first learn how fragile the axis upon which everything tilts. But to say you've come to terms with a city that's never loved you might be overstating things a bit. All you know is there was once a walk-up where now sits a lot vacant, and rats in deep grass hide themselves from the day. That one apartment fire set back in '76, one the streets called arson to collect a claim, could not do ultimately what the city itself did, left to its own dank devices some 16 years later. Rebellions, said some. Riots, said the rest. In any case, flames, and the home you knew, ash. It's not an actual memory, but you remember it still. A rust-bottomed Datsun handed down, then stolen, stripped recovered and built back from bolts, driving away in May 1992. What's left of that life quivers in the rear view, the world on fire, and half your head with it. Thank you guys for listening.
John, thank you so much, man. I mean, that was lights out. Thank you, John. Thank you, Nicole, for those transcendent, transportative readings and just for immersing us in the world of your poems. This is typically the point in a Logos gathering where we would invite everyone to introduce themselves to the new folks gathered around their table at Lazarus Brewing Company. You can just imagine some lovingly crafted tacos set before you on the table and some delicious, refreshing libations. Some bistro lights strung overhead, and we invite you to just take a moment to get to know one another and then ask some of these questions of one another, to maybe consider which elements in these poems moved you, how the language helped create the emotional experience you had hearing, reading the poem, and then what might these poems be asking you to consider or live into in the context of your own life. We love to just cultivate a little bit of connection between participants attending the reading and the poets who were delivering their poems. And the reading itself, we found it to manage such conversation in breakout rooms on Zoom is a little unwieldy. So what we'd like to do is just curate a little bit of conversation for you. Jason and I will pose a couple questions to our readers. And then if y'all want to use your raise hand feature or put some questions in the chat or somehow send a message to me or Jason that you'd like to ask a question or share some thoughts with the poets, we'd love to open it up for a little bit larger and more expansive dialogue. And maybe I'll just kind of kick us off. And John, I mentioned beforehand that one of the great pleasures of organizing these readings is that in preparation, we get to really immerse ourselves in your whole bodies of work and just kind of live in the worlds that your words summon up for a couple weeks. And I was re-listening to your wonderful Verses interview with Franny Choi and Dinesh Smith. And there's this, for me, a really thought-provoking moment when you're talking about sort of the creation of a curated self in the poems and sort of a mythology of the self. And so I'm curious about how you and Nicole maybe manage factual detail and reality in the crafting of your poems. And I'm wondering also if that connects in any way with a practice of empathy. And I know that empathy is sort of a problematic term or quality in a variety of ways that we can seek to kind of divest ourselves of our own particular privileged way of seeing the world and try to consider it through someone else's eyes. But that people like Camille Rankin and Natalie Diaz have reflected on how empathy can also be sort of a co-optive colonizing act if we presume to try to inhabit someone else's subjectivity. But you were talking about your poem, November 26, 1980, and altering details in that poem. And I'm wondering if doing that in some ways kind of helps you improve as a poet, improve as a person, that sort of engaging with the facts and details of what transpired in an event, what that works in you as you work a poem.
So a couple things. One, in terms of the curated self, the mythologized self, and the license to kind of play fast and loose with facts. It's a permission I've given myself from early on. I had a friend, one of my first poetry teachers, a poet by the name of Joel Diaz Porter, who says a poem is a half lie used to tell the whole truth. Another way of stating that same idea, I think Richard Hugo in The Triggering Town says, you owe the facts nothing, you owe the poem everything, right? So what I'm trying to do at all points is to write the best poem that I can. So if I'm writing a poem about the day I met Nicole and Gangnam Style was playing in the background, right? That doesn't really set a mood for what I'm trying to do in a poem. But I might put Prince, I Want to Be Your Lover, or might want to put some Marvin Gaye in the background, which wasn't true to the facts, but it's true for what the poem needs, right? But I think it goes a little deeper than that. I think that over time, there are stories we tell ourselves about ourselves in order to face ourselves. And we often make ourselves to be more empathetic, to be more kind, more noble often, right? I'm not really interested in that. What I found is that the stories that I've told about myself, I made myself more ruthless than I actually was growing up. You know, part of this mythologizing has to do, I think, with the notions of masculinity that we've received over the years, right? I'm working on something now. I'm not sure if it's going to be in verse or prose, but where I'm actually thinking about the effects of the Vietnam War on the young men raised in South Central Los Angeles. When men are taken out of the home and either don't come back or come back damaged, you have a whole generation of young men who are teaching themselves how to be quote unquote men by way of some really outmoded and kind of cartoonish notions of what that means, right? And how much of the self that I've cultivated over the years and the myth that I've created is still in conversation with those outmoded ways of thinking, right? So I'm looking at that as well. In terms of empathy, I guess this is related as well. I'm not very much interested in presenting myself as a quote unquote good person. I want to write good poems. And if the speakers in my poems are more interesting by being complicated, by being flawed, I allow that. Now, what often happens then is that I can then see my poems as a site for learning, for educating myself about myself. Why is it that this is the kind of speaker that shows up in my poems? And then I can ask myself those questions and then do the real work of being a better person, as opposed to curating a pleasant persona in the poems, if that makes any sense. So, you know, I think it's a win-win for me. The poems end up being better, and then at the end of it, I can be a better person for having written the poems.
I love that. And yeah, Nicole, I'd love to hear you reflect on that question as well. But I'm also curious if maybe you could expand a response to kind of connect with questions of form too. And maybe if form aids you in that work of learning, of truth telling, if form is a helpful technology for that.
Thank you for this question. And just want to echo everything that John has said and add that in the same book by Richard Hugo, Triggering Town, he quotes a novelist, I forget who, that says, a character says in the novel, "How do I know what I think until I see what I've said?" And so I think for me, my work is a curated self. It's a curated best self. It's a more thoughtful self. My ambition is to be a more thoughtful human being, and I'm more thoughtful in my poems because I have time to think about the ideas and things that have happened and have taken place. And so that curated self is a better version of myself that I aspire to. In terms of form for me is a way in. There's nothing for me more, I don't know, makes me the most fearful than a blank page. And so if I have something, a way in, say a form, an idea, something, it makes the page less daunting. And so if I have an idea and the idea includes how the poem looks, that's the first step in, for me, drafting something. Any way in is, yeah, any way in for me, I'll take. So form is that. And form also is a way to, I'm not really, I don't think I'm, John doesn't think this, but I don't think I'm great at meter and sound. And practicing form helps me to be a better music maker in my work. So there's that.
It's beautiful. Thank you, Nicole.
You're both incredible music makers, and you both are such formal masters, and it has me wondering, I think it was in the Commonplace podcast interview, John, that you did with Rachel Zucker, where you were talking a little bit about Duende and sort of Lorca's concept of that state that we can sometimes get into or want to get into or hope to get into when we're writing. And I guess I'm curious how the two of you balance being too in control of a poem and letting the poem tell you what it needs or where it wants to go.
You want to take that first?
No, go ahead. It's all you.
So there's that line by Hugo again, right? You owe the facts nothing, you owe the story or the poem everything. I tell my students when I'm teaching form, you owe the form nothing, you owe the poem everything. Yeah. So for me, the form has to serve the poem. And duende is a quality that, I've been thinking a lot about this over the years. Janine Joseph, who's here, we actually did a project together at NYU in a craft class. That's when I really started thinking about it. And one of the things I've really been thinking about lately is this question about where duende exists, right? Is it in the artist? Is it in the work of art? Or is it something that the consumer of the art, is the consumer the site of duende, right? Two people could listen to the same song or look at the same painting, and one could be moved to tears, have a very visceral experience, while the other one remains unmoved. So does the painting or the song have duende or not, right? I think a lot of it has to do with what's received or how the poem is received, the piece of art. And I think form is something that helps that along. Musicians know there are certain notes that resonate in certain parts of the body. Filmmakers, people who score films, they know that a certain string arrangement is going to make you want to cry, right? Some piano riffs are going to, evoke humor. I think the same thing holds for language, especially with language, because we're dealing with music as well as meaning. So there's a way to manipulate language in such a way that duende can be a felt experience on the part of the reader. So for me, I've been thinking a lot about, I don't want to say manufactured, but duende as a made thing, right? And form, meter, all the tropes that we've learned over the years aid in that. I don't know, but then also during the process, you let go in the sense that you don't know what you're going to write next. So this surprises are there, but what you get on a page, by the time it gets to you, it's all deliberate, right? Even if it seems sporadic, or even if it seems improvisational, now by the time it gets to you, it's meant to be there. It reminds me of this this concept in men's fashion, sprezzatura, which is a kind of a cultivated nonchalance, right? So it's the guy with the bed head. I don't have any hair, but imagine me with hair and it's moussed up perfectly to look like I just got out of bed like that. I probably spent a few hours in the mirror getting that look. Or the perfectly placed pocket square, right? It looks like I just dapped it in there, but actually no, it's really. So the same thing happens in the poems, you get a sense of spontaneity because I've done the work on my end.
Should I speak to that too, Jason?
Yes, please. I would love to hear your thoughts on duende and form control.
I think while much of the poem, as it's presented when it's published, is a curated thing, I think there are some moments of magic that just happen, moments in which duende can be delivered to us, right, by the gods, whoever. I think I think form lends itself to duende in that, especially the forms that have repetition and anaphora and white space and things like that, the meditative kind of chanting, haunting nature of those kinds of forms can lend themselves to that. But I do think John is absolutely on point. You know, like we can curate a poem in such a way to make a feeling felt. But I also think that some of that feeling has to do with a thing undescribable, the magic that makes a poem. So I think it's both a skilled professional working at this and the magic that just comes from the gods.
Amen. I'd love to just ask one more question and then maybe throw it back to you, Travis. I was looking for one of my favorite lines in your book, Nicole, in one of the legendary poems where you say, "I don't aspire, I'm whom one aspires to." And I guess that I just thought of that in relation to the lineage, the ancestors that inform your work. And if you could each maybe talk to, you know, we heard from Lucille at the beginning and we'll hear from Phil at the end, but some of the poets and other makers that have meant the most to you. And then I saw in the chat that someone is interested to hear, Nicole, what you might be working on next. So
Lucille Clifton, definitely. I mean, that poem is a lesson in just wisdom and brevity. I don't understand how Clifton can get in and out of a poem, making such magic with a handful of lines. Like, that's something that I will never, well, I hope to, but I can't. I just aspire to that level of brilliance. Who else? All my teachers. Sharon Olds is an angel walking among us. Yusef Komanyaka. I didn't study with Phil Levine, but I feel like I have a 1 degree of separation because John talked often, so you talk always so highly of him, and I've met him several times. And his work is just amazing. Bridget Pegeen Kelly song is like one of my all-time favorite poems, and I think that that poem is probably a favorite of many poets. Contemporary poets, Vivi Francis, you know, in terms of tradition, legacy, Shakespeare, the Procreation sonnets, like I love the Procreation sonnets. Who else? Everyone else. Can we just go and list everyone's name real quick? So there's I aspire to be many people at once. Yeah.
Unlike Nicole, my gift comes straight from the gods. So there have been none before me. There will be none after me. I'm just playing. No, I read too. And yeah, I've been fortunate, you know, to have worked with some of the people who really made me want to do this in the first place. Nicole mentioned Phil, who, you know, a few of us here studied with, and, you know, remained a mentor and something of a friend over the years. And, you know, I have Yusef, Bridget Begin Kelly, a lot of the same people that Nicole mentioned. Lately, Hayden Bishop and Levis has been somebody who's been consistently with me through a few years. My first poets, though, were the song makers, musicians, singers, yeah. So your Donny Hathaways, your Marvin Gayes, your Janis Joplins, yeah. Even the song makers did not use spoken language, like Carlos Santana is someone who's very dear to me. There's a quote from James Baldwin where he says, the first prerequisite of being a writer is having something to say. And I've always pushed back on that, because I don't know that I have a thing to say, a statement to make, right? But there's something that I want in the poems. There's an emotion or a feeling that I'm after. And it's, you know, it's that duende we talk about. It's what happens when Marvin Gaye is screaming at the end of a song, or when Santana in Europa goes off on this, you know, solo. and that's always what I'm reaching for. So yeah, it's and we're constantly reading. And Leah Silveus, who's one of my students who was on this call, if you guys don't know her work, you need to check out her work. And another student of mine, Essie Stone, is doing important work. So check them out.
I also want to just quickly shout out Cave Canem. I know Malcolm is here. Shout out to Malcolm as well. Cave Canem, founded 20 plus years ago to remedy the underrepresentation of Black people in the field. I took some of my first workshops at Cave Canem with Patricia Smith, who is our president, well, second president now. And Willie Perdomo and Marilyn Nelson and others. So like Cave Canem has just been, I mean, it calls itself a home, and it really is a home for Black poets, myself included in that.
I want to jump into, just to give props to another one of my OGs, Martina Espada, as well as Willie Perdomo. Can never forget my OGs.
Thank you so much. I mean, I know that we're technically at time for the formal portion of our programming, but Yuki Jackson put a wonderful question here in the chat that I think is too good not to engage you both on. I mean, John, she specifically asked about the process of writing the Dolphy poem and whether it was one of stitching together existing material over time or whether it was written in one continuous stream. And I wonder if that would also give us a way into talking a little bit about process. And I'm wondering, in that idea of poems to some degree being gifted by the gods, if there's anything that either of you do to ritualize your process to maybe entice those gods into being a bit more generous with the inspiration. I know that, Nicole, you mentioned writing your way into poems through form, and John, I've heard you reflect on setting yourself exercises, but any other ways that you, I guess with so many students on the call, any knowledge you'd want to drop on us about process and maybe increasing the gods' receptivity to collaboration?
Nicole, you want to answer that first? Because I think the question about the Eric Dolphy poem, my answer might be a little longer, and I don't want to take up a lot of space.
I think it's just a matter of being present when you're blessed with the poem, right? So you have to be ready to take that down. So you have to find yourself in the seat with pen in hand, and ready to receive whatever gift comes. And so I would just encourage everyone to just make it a habit of sitting down to write. And if nothing comes, you haven't lost a day, you've put in some thought in what's to come. So just make it a habit of getting your writing space right and having everything you need at hand, so you're not oh, I have to make my tea before I can do this, I have to do, making excuses before you really get to the work. So just be present, and wait, be present and wait, and in the interim, while waiting, practice, and by practice I mean practice your meter, pick up a book, do all the things that that one would do when they're trying to be the best at the thing that they love the most. So just be present.
Yeah, ditto everything Nicole said. I don't have any added rituals, but just coming to the table, coming to the desk daily and hope something good happens. Yeah. In terms of the Eric Dolphy poem, yes, both things. It is a matter of stitching together various strands, and in some ways the poem, at least a draft of it, came at once. And so going back, and I guess see, I told you, Nicole, people need to know some context. So this is the explanation that I didn't get to provide before. Okay, so in the early 90s, I was living in DC and I was walking down the street, and a bird, it was starting to get dark. I got attacked by a bird. And then the bird kept flying and flailing around me and going back and forth between me and another bird that had his foot caught in a car door. and was kind of beating himself against the door trying to get free. Years later, when I started writing poetry seriously, I thought to myself, ooh, I have a good idea for a poem. But every time I would try to write that poem, it never came. It never came, right? And then when I read the article about Eric Dolphy, it made me think about bird songs, maybe think of those birds. And now I have these two things kind of playing off each other. There's a relationship, right? Conversation happening. Once I started writing those things, I started thinking about why I walked away and why that memory stayed with me for so long. And around the same time, I see a fight with these guys in the middle of the street in Brooklyn. And again, I walked away and I left them both in the street fighting. None of my business, you know, I get to where I need to go safely. So now I'm thinking, oh, that's exactly what I was doing with the birds. Why? So now I have 3 strands and they're kind of playing off each other, right? And now I'm really wondering and asking these questions, and that took me back to some childhood memories. So that now that, and this is over the course of say 20 something years that these memories are accumulating, right? And these incidents. So there are these various strands, but once they all start to kind of, I don't know anything about science, but I guess if you introduce one element to another element, something happens or something, yeah, that happens, right? And now there's a single setting where something comes out that you, in successive drafts, you can then work on the music, work on the image, work on things that are happening, right? Technically. But yeah, so it's a matter of letting memories, letting events accumulate, being patient, not trying to rush them into a poem. Yeah. And then also doing your due diligence on the other side of that to make sure that what ends up on the page is what you want to leave there.
Y'all, that's so beautiful, and I know we're moving to close, and I know John and Nicole, you expressed your willingness to hang out for a couple minutes afterwards and visit with folks a bit. But being that we're just a few days after Valentine's Day, I can't resist asking, as partnered poets, how you serve perhaps as one another's teachers, or how you what sort of inspiration and instigation do you give one another in your shared work life? And if you're willing to disclose anything about what it's like to be married to the John Murillo or the Nicole Sealey, and how that impacts your writing or connects with it.
I'll go first.
But you're unmuted.
Oh, I'm unmuted.
John is such a good poet, and just like a great, he just works so hard at his poems. And I want to impress him with my work, all of it. He's my first reader, my mother my second, and then Martha Collins third. But I want to impress you with my work. And I want to, beyond that, make you proud. And so, yeah, and your poems are so good that it's so hard. It's so hard to be that good. But I'm trying. And he indulges me, and he wears shirts that I buy him, like the one that he has on now, that is a sloth that says, "Let's hang and read."
The sloth is my spirit animal.
It is.
And this is because I'm slow at everything. And this is a sloth with a book in his hand, so it's even more so my spirit animal. Well, thank you for saying all those things. It's the same. For me, the first inspiration comes just in hearing Nicole read her poems again. You guys were listening just like I was. The kids today, they say bars, right? Nicole has bars, right? I mean, just line after line is just like a machete coming through, just and it's Yeah, I aspire to that, that lyricism. And I also want to impress Nicole, which can be a bad thing sometimes. If I bring a draft too early to Nicole, like I did just the other day, and I'll read it to Nicole, and she's like, "Oh yeah, that's nice." I'm like, ah, and I don't even want to come back to the draft, right? Because if she's not blown away out the gate, then I won't. I won't even go back to it. So I have to kind of resist that and spend some time working on the poems, because again, she is also my first reader. Um, and I've been thinking lately about the difference between audience and listener. Um, and listeners, I think to write for a listener is a little more intimate. Um, and she is the first person I write for, right? Um, and yeah, so the hard work is an act of care, it's an act of love. The same way that I wouldn't just throw a slab of meat on a plate and hand it to her and be like, here, what my man Kowalski say at the beginning of Streetcar Named Desire? Meat. I wouldn't do that, right? I would season it properly. I would tenderize it properly. I'd watch the flame. I would, marinate it. I would make sure that it's paired with something that matches. Make sure that the wine, and I make sure it looks good on a plate. Even if I'm making toast in the morning time, there's a plate on which I cut the toast and it has crumbs on it. That's not the plate she gets. She gets the plate that looks nice. So when I'm writing poems for her as my first reader, I take the same care. It's an act of love.
Y'all, that is it's so beautiful. Thank y'all for serving us this feast of your poetry and presence this evening, for blessing us with your love, for letting us into your homes through these virtual screens. It's such a joy and such a blessing and such an honor to have a chance to host you all this evening. So thank you so much for being here. And we'll, I guess, have a few moments to visit with y'all after this call, even though we're already going long, but it's an extra incentive to everyone who's here on Zoom rather than just tuning in through Facebook land. So we'd love to just give folks an opportunity to know how to get their hands on your books and to share a little love for the projects we're doing, the projects y'all are doing, love for Cave Canem. So I'm going to drop some links in our chat right now. And Jason, you want to share a little bit about what we're up to at Logos, Eco Theo, and into the summer at Wonder?
Yeah, so definitely encourage you all, if you don't already have all of their books, to get John and Maria's stuff through Bookwoman. And we are especially grateful to have Malcolm Tariq in the call with us tonight in the house. We've been enjoying very much getting to collaborate with him and Cave Canem to put together Starshine and Clay Fellowship that will launch this summer with 4 fellows getting an opportunity to participate in a big Logos festival in July and appear in the summer issue of Eco Theo. Coming up next month, we'll have Christopher Kempf and Srikanth Reddy. In April, we'll have Julie Blomnicki and Jane Hirschfield. And sometime in May, we'll have Tiana Clark and Jesse Bertrand. And yeah, in July, we're hoping that with President Biden and the rollout of the vaccines, that we'll actually get to pull off something we've been trying to put together in Wyoming. So hoping that it will actually come to pass in person, and that we'll get to welcome all of the Cave Canem crew there. And looking forward to seeing some of you again in the coming months. And thank you again, John and Nicole, for just an extraordinary evening of poetry.
Indeed. Thank you both so very much, John and Nicole. And thank you all for sharing a bit of your evening with us. It's a cold and sort of despair-inducing one in Austin tonight. My lovely partner and our puppy and I are sleeping in our church as we're without power. So thank you, Nicole and John, for bringing such warmth and light into this wintertime for all of us. And we'll close the same way we opened, by reading reading a beloved poem collectively, and John and Nicole will lead us in this reading. So I invite you to speak these bolded lines aloud into the space around you if you're here on our Zoom call, so that you can add your voice to that of the collective. So I'll ring the prayer bell and we will close with this wonderful poem by Phil Levine.
Let me begin again as a speck
of dust caught in the night winds,
sweeping out to sea. Let me begin,
this time knowing the world is
salt water and dark clouds. The world
is grinding and sighing all night and dawn.
comes slowly and changes nothing. Let
me go back to land after a lifetime
of going nowhere, this time lodged
in the feathers of some scavenging gull,
white above the black ship that docks
and broods upon the oily waters of
your harbor. This leaking freighter
has brought a hold full of hay forks
from Spain, great Jeroboams of dark,
Algerian wine and quill pens that can't
write English. The sailors have stumbled
off toward the bars or the bright houses.
The captain closes his log and falls asleep.
1:10:28. Tonight I shall enter my life.
After being at sea for ages, quietly.
In a hospital named for an automobile.
The one child of millions of children.
Who has flown alone by the stars.
Above the black wastes of moonless waters.
That stretched forever. Who has turned.
Golden in the full sun of a new day.
A tiny wise child who this time will love his life because it is like no other.
Thank you, friends, for blessing us with your time and your presence this evening. Thank you, John and Nicole, for being with us. We hope you all stay warm, stay safe, stay healthy, and we hope to see you at another Logos gathering sometime soon. Be well, y'all. Go in peace, and hope to see you very soon.